It's time for Supply Chain Now Radio, sponsored by Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia, Supply Chain Now Radio spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the companies, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. Now, here are your hosts.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Supply Chain Now Radio. We are broadcasting live today from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Scott Luton. I'm your host for today's session. In today's live webinar, we're going to be gaining key insights and best practices from the world of supply chain management, project management. More and more organizations are looking for proven methods for managing projects as a means to digest change. Our guest speaker today is Laura Davidson, past president of PMI Atlanta and a current advisor to the Project Management Institute. More about Laura in just a moment, but as always, we are glad to have you with us here today on Supply Chain Now Radio. So let's tackle our ground rules first, which we try to keep it simple here at Supply Chain Now Radio. All attendees will be on mute as we're looking to optimize the audio experience. With that said, let's make it as interactive as possible. So please do submit your questions via the chat toolbar. We will answer as many as we have time for at the conclusion of today's webinar. Finally, a PDF of today's presentation and the recording will be made available in the next few days to each of our attendees. So let's take a minute to recognize our sponsors here on Supply Chain Now Radio. Big thanks to our sponsor, Apex Atlanta, which has been serving the Metro Atlanta community since 1964. Apex Atlanta is a nonprofit industry association dedicated to the supply chain management space. To learn more, visit us at apexatlanta.org. Special thanks to our sponsor, Talent Stream, a WeBank certified recruiting and staffing firm that specializes in helping organizations find top talent in the engineering, manufacturing, and supply chain space. To learn more, visit us at talentstreamstaffing.com. So you're in for a treat, audience. Let's learn more about our speaker today. Laura Davidson has an eclectic work history of being motivated by opportunities that teach her new skills and grant her chances to elevate her team's morale and productivity in particular. For longer than she likes to admit, Laura has executed projects in the supply chain, technology, and consumer industries. She has completed unlikely projects and mastered difficult relationships while always striving to deliver a quality end product. Laura is a self-proclaimed serial volunteer. She is currently a global volunteer for PMI, which is a wonderful organization, the Project Management Institute, where she serves as a chapter member advisor working to align processes at the roughly 300 worldwide PMI chapters. She is past president of PMI Atlanta, which has 5,000 members, as we learned this morning about, and runs robust programming here in Metro Atlanta. Certainly a moving and shaking organization. In 2019, Laura is combining her business and leadership skills to serve the local National Speakers Association as president to the Georgia chapter. She's an effective and entertaining communicator, which I can attest to, with a genuine desire for helping others improve both their personal and professional situations. With all that said, please join me in welcoming Laura Davidson.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you, everyone, that is on the webinar. On the slide now, you see me. That's what I look like. And I started working out when I was 2, so we'll cover my background in a little bit. But I wanted to tell you, I actually started out working in supply chain, and my early career these are just some of the highlights. I did a lot of everything. And this was back when you had to do it without computers. So, yeah, that was a minute ago. But I built truckloads, shipments from all over the United States to distribution centers that were in Georgia. And I had to set up, based on what the products were, based on whether or not it was perishable. I was working in retail at that time, so the product might be perfume, it might be furs, it might be clothing, it might be furniture, it might be things like that. And to really date myself, it was Riches and Richway. So I was working there, and they had, because they were owned by the same company, I was loading trucks, and part of the shipment would go to the Riches DC, and part of the shipment would go to the Richway DC. But they might pick up 5,000 pounds in one city and 12,000 pounds somewhere else. And I was coordinating those shipments. So I had a really deep understanding of how long it took to get there, what it took to get it on the truck, how to load the truck, and which distribution center to get it to. So that being said, I have those organizational skills and can relate to everything that you do every day. And that I went on and worked in telecommunications, and I did global deliveries of components that were used in telephone systems. And the biggest thing that I did at that time was making arrangements with New York City to drop concrete vaults in the city. So I'd coordinate with a helicopter to drop a concrete vault, and work with the city to close down a street, work with the electricity and everything to shut that down, to lower a concrete vault so they could run fiber and telecommunication systems in Manhattan. So that was kind of interesting and also pretty complex in doing that. And then I worked in paper and building products, did various assignments, but probably the most interesting that I did was I managed the quality and the shipment and the delivery at 16 warehouses. And after that, I went out and looked at my skills, and my skills aligned very well with project management. So then I worked in consumer products, and I used those skills that I had learned earlier to roll out SAP to 187 locations around the world. I worked in an insurance company to implement a biometrics application. Working with actuaries is an interesting assignment. Enjoyed that very much. Then I've done various software implementations and learned a lot of skills doing that when I was actually working, rolling out SAP implementations to warehouses when I was back doing the paper and building product shipments. And then most recently, I've worked in an enterprise architecture team managing IT governance and compliance. So making sure everything rolled out. I've been a SOX auditor and done various things like that. So that's a little bit about me, and we're going to dive into what some project management skills that can help you with what you do day to day. And I just want to stress, I'm not trying to convert anybody to project management. I'm not trying to make you grow up and be a project manager. What I am trying to do is twofold. One, maybe help you understand a little bit better what the project managers in your organization do, maybe how to, talk to them a little bit better. But also, there are a few little skills and tidbits that you can take away that might make your jobs a little bit more effective from the beginning. So that's my whole intent here. So moving along. Have you gotten this feeling when you're looking for a job or someone's looking at you and they're kind of talking to you about, they're wanting, they're using those words flexible and stretch and working with difficult people and fast situations and things like that. And what they're looking for is faster than a speeding bullet. And they want truth, integrity, accuracy, all those things in a hardworking person. And project management professional responsibilities include managing scope and quality and cost. And the job descriptions include working across the organization, handling time-sensitive and confidential efforts, and requiring cross-organization collaboration and consensus. But you know what's interesting? So do supply chain professionals. Very, very similar. And sometimes what that looks like is this. So you're rolling that rock up the hill. Because the job description looks like one thing, but you get in and it's got some other components. So let's see if we can't figure out a way to break that rock down and make it a little smaller. In project management, there's a term that's often referred to as the triple constraint. And if you imagine a stool, and it's made up of quality, time, scope, and cost, any of those three legs, if they're shortened or lengthened, is going to make that whole stool wobble. And it's going to impact what's the delivery and what the quality is that outlook is going to end up being. So the whole point here in that image of a stool helps you understand that there's got to be some balance between if you add more time, then it's going to be a little bit lopsided. And if you add more time, then you have to add accordingly. So whatever you take away or add, you have to do that to the other elements as well in order to keep that stool in balance. And we'll talk a little bit more about ways to do that as we progress. But in supply chain, and this is an image of a traditional supply chain. I know it's different today, and with all the e-commerce methods, it's little bit, it's not the traditional supply chain, but what is still the same thing is we have to make the end customer happy. And if the end customer's expectations aren't met from wherever that is, and the end customer could actually be any elements in that link. And I recognize that. But if you break the link, you've broken the quality and you've jeopardized your relationship and your continued success. So let's dig into that a little bit. So what we're both trying to do is deliver something that is fast, good, and inexpensive. Inexpensive didn't fit in the circle, so I used the word cheap. But if you do something that's good and cheap, it's going to turn out pretty slow. If it's good and fast, it's going to be expensive. If it's fast and cheap, it's going to just be ugly. But what the whole goal and what your client is always asking for is really kind of impossible because they want the intersection of all three. So we're working towards that. But again, it's back to that stool. You got to find the balance. You got to find that intersection between what's the right quality, what's the right price, and what's the right duration of how to get it delivered. So some tools to do that. First off, project managers and supply chain managers have been working together for a very long time. And this is a great pyramid of Giza, and it was completed about 2,500 years before Christ. And it took 20 years and 10,000 workers. And while some of our projects feel like this, I just wanted to say that whatever we call ourselves, we've been working together for a very long time. So let's talk about what's a project. A project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or results. That's the PMI, the Project Management Institute, project management body of knowledge definition for a project. And the key phrases in there are that it's temporary, it's got a start and a finish, and it's unique. And that's a little bit different from what happens in supply chain because supply chain is often repeatable. But they work together because often it's projects that support what's going on in your supply chain world. So when we talk about a project, or if you're talking about a supply chain effort, you want to build a plan. And a plan's like a map. And in the planning phase, for building that map, of course you know that there are going to be tasks that are involved, and you're going to figure out, which tasks go where and what they're going to do. But if you really drill into those tasks, and you start thinking particularly about how long it takes to do each task, who's going to do it, can someone else do it, has it been done before, are there triggers or dependencies for the task? All these things, when you start kind of getting to that micro level for each of the tasks, you can start planning ahead. And what you're also going to be thinking about are what are the contingencies? What are the things that can happen if these tasks go south, if something's not going to go right? But we're going to dig a little bit more into that as well. So some common terms in project management are WBS, and that stands for Work Breakdown Structure. And what that really means is breaking a large project into individual tasks. So you're going to think about each task regarding its duration, cost, its resource needs, the risk, etc. The main purpose of the work breakdown structure is to reduce complicated activities to a collection of tasks. And each task must be measurable and independent. WBS itself, that phrase, was established by the Department of Defense in the 1960s, so it goes back a while. In fact, most of these terms go back to the military and those times. And PERT. PERT originally stood for Program Evaluation and Review Technique. What it's evolved into, and this also goes back to the 1960s, and was actually created for when the Polaris missile was done by the U.S. Navy. But what it really stands for is a measurement of time. And if you think about every activity that's going to get you to your end result, and if you consider what's the optimal time that could happen? If you got all the green lights, how fast could you get there? If you got all red lights, what's your worst case scenario? And what's your average scenario? And I'm not going to go into the minutia of what the formula is, but there is a specific PERT formula that actually gives you kind of a weighted average of what that time could be. So sometimes if you have no idea how long it's going to take to do something, and this is really thinking about each task again, not just your overall effort, but this is a way to make your overall effort more accurate by breaking down each task. And the critical path is the longest length of time it takes to complete the project tasks. So if you're looking at those elements that are in there, it's the entire start to finish of the project, but you're looking at each task and what's the longest element for each one. And then a Gantt chart is a visual way of actually looking at the schedule of all of these things. And so what that looks like is this. And this is an image of a kind of a Gantt chart with a description of what a Gantt chart is. If you imagine every line is a task and every column is a duration of time. So those blocks of color are showing you how long that task is going to take. And if you'll notice they're in parallel, because tasks can happen in parallel. They don't have to happen consecutively, unless one has to be completed before the other. But many tasks can happen simultaneously. So this gives you a visual image of what the entire effort looks like by breaking it down and doing it that way. So communication is important. The statistics are all over the map, but they're always very high. I've even heard that poor communication can lead to 70% of projects failing. This one's a little bit low for that effort, but I think we all would agree that communication is very, very important in any of our efforts. And in supply chain, you know, you are talking to a lot of people. You're talking to an enterprise. You're talking to vendors. You're talking to just everybody to try to get it all done. And sometimes it feels like you're talking to them all at once. And you have to have those relationships, and you have to keep really good notes, and you have to stay on top of what those expectations are and satisfying those expectations. So let's drill a little bit into that. When you look at communication, it is a means of influence, and it's going to create the momentum to get things done. And you are establishing leadership through your communication. And I think supply chain managers are people who do show leadership, and they do have influence in organization, because it's just in your DNA to be the people who get stuff done. And you know how to do that. You know who to call. You know who to reach out to do that. And that's part of the leadership to do that. So some of the tools that you want to use to make your communication better are attitude. This isn't just about having a positive attitude. This is about being available. It's about being consistent. It's about being solutions driven, and of course being positive. Adaptable. You want to be resourceful. This is about being solutions driven and creative issue resolution. And you want to be accurate. You want to be organized. You want to be reliable, and you want to be credible when you do that. And of course, effective communication includes listening and building trust. I have what I call the water cooler stalking strategy. And a lot of times we work with executives when we need something, senior level leadership. When things go foul, things go south, you're going to need to bring in the high level, a VP or a CIO, you're some C-suite person, and you're going to need to tell them things are going south, and you're going to need to ask for more money or more time, or you need to tell them that something's just not going to happen. That's not the first time you want to meet these people. That's not the first impression you want to make, and you don't want them to always associate your name and your face with that particular situation. So as soon as you know that you've got an effort on the plate that you're working on, find out who the chain of command is beyond your executive sponsor, and go spend a little time with their executive admin. Find out how they tick, find out a little bit about their schedule, and I'm using bunny ears, but you can't see it. Accidentally run into them occasionally and introduce yourself. Find some way to connect with them on a positive note. Hopefully you don't have to go and deliver any bad news. Hopefully you're not the one who has to do that. But I guarantee that if you've already met them and you've already associated yourself with having that positive image and introducing yourself and letting them know what you're working on ahead of time, it's a much more positive experience. And doesn't mean you'll get what you need, but it does mean that you're not forever associated with a negative experience when you run into them in the elevator later on. So let's talk about a communication strategy. I talked a little bit about stakeholders that are outside of what you might normally think of. Consider stakeholders that can influence a more positive outcome. Consider stakeholders that can give you input on how to make it more successful. Maybe they're stakeholders who have done this before. They have some experience either with the customer or with the solution that you're using. And also consider stakeholders that can have an impact on what you're doing. These are not always people that are directly involved in what you're working on, but they can make a difference, and they can be good resources for you. We all think about the various communication modes, but use a variety. Figure out how people want to learn. We have a lot of tools at our hand. We can have video conference calls, and that's a nice way to put a face to a name. If you do it with some frequency, it actually becomes very comfortable, and you actually get a very similar relationship to what you do when you have the face-to-face communications as well. And if you have a lot of virtual teams, you can build those relationships with some simple things. You can find out when everybody's birthday is. You can have somebody deliver a birthday card during a meeting. And so you can kind of humanize those experiences and create, again, a better relationship to get things done. You know, we spend a lot of time working. And work, if you're not having a little bit of fun and you're not doing some things that are positive, then work just becomes another 4-letter word. So it's important to have a good balance, and you can do some things that add some levity. There's a lot of stress in the jobs that you do. And sometimes just remembering to be able to recognize the people that you work with. And it goes a little bit more than the thank you or the buying them pizza and donuts and things like that. But it's okay to buy donuts too, because, you know, everybody likes donuts. And think about how often you're going to talk to people. It's, you know, this sounds kind of like a nerdly way to plan this out. But if you need to make some notes early in your effort about how often you're going to contact people, because again, you don't want to get a reputation of only contacting people when you need something. It's good to figure out how to network and connect with some frequency. So it's you know, whatever it takes, however often you need to do it. There's some people you have to talk to on a regular basis, and that's going to be for the job. But there's some other people that it's just really important that you, even if you have to mark it on your calendar, just so you do it on a regular basis. It's going to help your network, it's going to help your professional ability, and it's going to help your outcome on the efforts that you're working on. Just because you're circling back, especially that layer of stakeholders I talked about earlier, those people who can help you without being directly involved in what you're working on. A tool that project managers use is a communications plan or a communications matrix, and that actually details who the people are and what their roles are. But the part that I've highlighted is you want to have that emphasis on when is this effort supposed to start and when is it supposed to end. And those last columns help identify those people I talked about before, who can add influence, who can add impact, who's got some input, can make a difference. And that last column, what's in it for them? And this isn't just about the traditional WIFM that we think about. This is what are their goals in the organization? How does this align with what they're trying to satisfy in the organization? So if you've got that executive sponsor that's aligned their, key metrics or their key performance indicators with something, does this project have any impact on that? That would be good to know up front. That would be good to know ahead of time. And when you're working with your project managers, that's also a good thing to know, because they're going to be delivering a status report of where the project is and what level, what is it? Is it on time? Is it running late? Is it a disaster? If there's some elements that align with the organizational goals, you want to make sure they include those in their status, or that they're aware of those ahead of time. And risk. Risk is something we talk about risk, and we early in an effort think about risk. But what if you tie it back to those tasks I told you about earlier? What if you tied it to each of those individual efforts, and you thought about up front kind of what happens if we don't do it? What are the alternatives? Various questions. I'm not going to go through each one, but if you're thinking about it related to the task and not the overall effort that's being done, and how are you going to mitigate that? So if you're thinking through that, you're also asking, what's the impact? Is it a high impact? Is it low? What's the probability of this risk happening? And a really quick tool to use to help with that is this little grid, this little matrix. If you think about the risks that you have and you just very quickly plot them in any of these quadrants, the risks that you need to pay attention to are the ones that are in the shadow. Now, I'm not saying totally ignore the other ones, but the ones to really focus your energy on are the ones that are in that shaded area. And it's good if you can have some kind of a contingency or thought, to what can happen should that happen, and what can help you anticipate and react and respond faster, or understanding what the triggers are. So if you can identify what might cause a risk, and you can anticipate those triggers, you can actually eliminate the risk before it even happens. And this is a real control mechanism. And sometimes it can be as small as just understanding what's coming up and understanding if someone's got some impact on something. Looking at what's that impact. If you can anticipate and know, and this is often a statement afterwards, boy, I wish I'd known that before, that kind of a thing. So it's thinking about it ahead of time and anticipating what might happen, and how to recognize it before it causes a huge impact. So when we're looking at all these things, and we're looking at, these are actually project management terms for the phases of a project, but it can also be mirrored along the lines of when you're looking at manufacturing a product, creating a product, or coming up with a concept, all the way through to delivering it to an end customer. In the beginning, early in the effort, if there's anything that's going south, if you find out the quality's not correct, or the destination's not correct, or the mode has to be changed, or the time has to be, moved up, it doesn't cost a lot of money early in the project to change that. But the closer you get to the end of the effort, the closer you get to that final delivery, the more money it costs to correct the mistakes. So the sooner that you can address whatever change needs to be done, or whatever error might happen, and that goes back to those breaking things down into small tasks, breaking the effort down, and looking at how long it, different ways to and it's really that how we tell children to handle big projects. It's how do you eat an elephant all at one time? You eat it one bite at a time. So this is the same thing. If you look at small bite-sized elements of your efforts, and the sooner you can anticipate things that may happen, the faster you can address those. So I've got a shameless plug for PMI Atlanta, because I think professional networking is really important to all of us. And yes, I am kind of a PMI poster child, but I also want to let you know that the local chapter in Atlanta has about 15 to 17 events a month. And as Scott mentioned, there are about 5,000 members in the Atlanta area. And they cover so many industries, so that if you're either looking for more information about an industry that you're working in, or if you're looking to change industries, or if you're looking at methodology, there's some opportunities, even if you just get on their mailing list, to see what's going on for the various topics that are held. They are starting a new industry-specific forum called for auto and transportation. And that's really concentrated on Atlanta being a logistics hub. And so many automotive manufacturing companies have moved to the Atlanta area. So they're looking at what that means. I can't help but think that a lot of their topics are going to be around manufacturing as well. And it's just to let you know, the topics are not always about project management, but they are in these industries, and that might be of some use to you to help broaden your knowledge, include those stakeholders. Those stakeholders I talked about that can influence and have impact. They may not be in your organization. They may be people that you can create as mentors too. It's also a way to broaden your network of who you know and who can help you, and who you can help as well, because giving back is I've always found that the more I give, the more I get. So it's a good opportunity to do that. And like Apex, PMI has been in Atlanta for over 30 years. In fact, PMI Global will be 50 years old this year and has a lot going on with a 50-year birthday. But in Atlanta, it's 30 years strong and a lot of people involved and a lot that's going on there. So I encourage you to take a look. And I want to go and let you know that I built up about the planning and such. And this isn't about kissing frogs and flying pigs. It is about taking small changes to have a big impact. And the planning phase of any effort often gets overlooked because we're so quickly working on what's the solution and how do we dig into getting done. And so we can move on to the next thing. But if you take a few minutes during that planning phase and find some quiet space and start drilling into the tasks that go into the effort that you're working on, looking at the communication that you've got to do and the people that can help you get it done and working on that. And then looking at all of the risks that can be involved and anticipating that. They're small little changes, but they can have a huge, huge impact. So you're planning for contingency and working on various things to make sure from the very beginning that something's not going to go awry. Knowing your stakeholders, knowing your audience, knowing who, using something that's like a communication plan. And then looking at the likelihood of risk and looking at what might be a trigger and what could be involved in that. And with that.
Fantastic. We've got some questions, some time for some questions. Laura really enjoyed that presentation and that really practical presentation as well. You mentioned the robust events and programming that PMI Atlanta has, 15 to 17 events a month. Holy cow. As a volunteer leader with Apex, that is a lot of volunteer bandwidth. But one thing, as I ventured over to PMIAtlanta.org, you were not lying. Lots of events. But I saw this Project Talks, which I thought was a very interesting concept, kind of like a TED Talk for the project management world. March 6th from 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. at the Atlanta John Marshall Law School. It looks like it's designed to bring you 4 presentations, 20 minutes each, in a variety of topics from looks like managing team performance to agile, which of course is all the rage these days, the strategic mindset for your organization, career, and life. And you're hearing from these 4 different thought leaders all in 80 minutes time. That's a pretty neat event. Yeah. And you're earning PDUs while you do it. So you can check all these. This is just one of dozens of events available from a variety, from Toastmasters to project management best practices to dinner meetings and networking events. Check that out at pmiatlanta.org. All right. So while we have you still, Laura, and to our audience members, we're going to take the next 10 minutes or so to pose questions. Take your questions and pose them to Laura Davidson. So while we have a project management extraordinaire, this is your opportunity to pick her brain. So first question that we have comes from Martha, and that is going to be, what is the difference between a RACI chart and a communications plan?
Thank you for asking that, Martha. RACI is attributed to what are the key responsibilities and who are handling those, and whether they are responsible for the activity, accountable for the activity, to be consulted for the activity, or just informed on the activity. But a communication plan is really who are all of the team members and the stakeholders that are involved, and what's their role as far as needing to know what's going on. So RACI is more about the people who are doing the job, and the communications plan is more about who needs to know about the plan.
Great question. Thank you, Martha, and great answer there, Laura. Appreciate that. I want to pose a question to you. We've got one more submitted again to our audience. You can use the chat toolbar option to pose your question or observations to Laura, and I'll pose those to her as time permits. So we had a podcast this morning where we were talking cybersecurity with a technology guru and expert that does consulting in that space, and she was talking about how the hackers and the hacking teams, they're not these days just great programmers and coders and with that technical expertise, but she spoke to how they are assembling diverse project teams to advance, and it's crazy, this is a scary world we live in, but advance the hacking, enhance its success and its effectiveness. So kind of taking a step back from the edge, but thinking about that, and I mean, she even mentioned psychologists were being recruited to apply psychology methodology to hacking programs and initiatives. So pretty advanced stuff. But let's talk about in the world of project management, and we've all been on a project team of some sort, whether we call it that or not. Speak to the value of diversity and diversity of thought.
That's a good question. Diversity of thought is really that's part of what I was alluding to when I talk about getting additional stakeholders and their input involved, because you want people to be able to look at the entire effort from a different vantage point. Sometimes, again, I'll reference that mindset of we're wanting to get this done. We're wanting to check that box off. We're wanting to move on to the next thing, and we've probably got 5 things going on at one time. If we've got a diverse team that brings multiple skills, like bringing psychologists to the hacker team, if you're bringing diverse skills in, and that includes cultures, that includes background, that includes education, and today it also includes age, because generationally our workplace looks very different as well. And the technology that's used to satisfy what the effort is versus how we use the technology, and even the knowledge about what the technology is. So looking at that, and like it or not, if the younger you are, the more people seem to have be adroit at using technology. So right. It does add a different element, but also people who have that difference in their backgrounds of when I started out 100 years ago or so, I worked with a lot of people who had been truck drivers, and they had made enough money to hire other people to drive trucks. And now they owned a small company, and they, and I negotiated rates with them, and I understood what they did. And, but they brought a very different flavor to the table than, 10 or 15 years later, when I was talking to people who had never seen the inside of a truck cab and didn't understand that when you're on the road, and much like when you're working on your efforts, a driver has to look far out onto the horizon because they can't stop 80,000 pounds on a dime. So if you're doing your efforts, you have to look out on the horizon too, so that you can be nimble and you can make adjustments as you go.
Now I've seen some interesting things on 285. Lots of big trucks doing some interesting things, stopping on a dime and other things. But what interesting perspective there. I really like the fact that, I think when folks hear the diversity word, sometimes there's a lot of assumptions made, and the definition maybe some folks have in their mind of diversity is not diverse enough. Because I like all the categories you laid out there, because when you're really looking at truly creating, especially if you have a chance to pick and choose, a truly diverse team, there's a plethora of factors you can take into consideration. So terrific perspective there, Laura. Next question is going to come from Howard, and Howard must be one of the engineers of the group. He asked, can I use PERT to estimate delivery time?
You can, Howard, but you probably have software that will help to estimate it a lot better than PERT. But PERT is a formula that was used a long time ago to do that, and I wanted to just help you with the mindset of what's the best case scenario, what's the worst case scenario, and what's the average, to think about your tasks that you're doing. But the reality is, you've got software that's going to tell you how to do that.
These days. Wow.
Yes.
Everything automated and done for us. So that's going to wrap up Q&A this afternoon with Laura Davidson. And Laura, would you welcome, if folks have questions, or if they want to maybe have you come out and present to their group or their organization and other things, or you welcome that outreach?
Absolutely. I'd love to come and talk to you.
Terrific. And so we'll be providing Laura's contact information with the deck that goes out in the next day or two. Again, we encourage you, and I know Laura encourages you to check out the PMI organization. We've done some collaborating with PMI on the local level between Apex Atlanta and between Talent Stream, and I've really enjoyed each time we've engaged. We've done the recruiter speed dating, which is always a neat event. I think it usually takes place in the summer, and it's just, project management these days is a very hot space in supply chain and across industry, as we're all trying to rapidly digest that change. So we're going to wrap up on a couple of final items. I want to thank Laura again for her time and perspective today. We want to roll out a couple of announcements here. So we have recently, not recently, but in the last few months, rolled out a text to subscribe feature for our webinar programming. All this is to make it easier for our routine guests, especially. So no need to register on a one-off basis for each of our webinars. To be auto-enrolled, you text supply chain to 42828. We'll take it from there. You will be enrolled into each of our webinar offerings coming up, and you'll get reminder emails. And of course, if you don't like one particular topic, you don't have to show up, and you'll still have access to the recording as you see fit. So hopefully this makes your life a little bit easier. Next up, we want to make sure that you're aware of I4Transport's 3PL and Supply Chain Summit, which is coming here to Atlanta, the Supply Chain City, in June 2019. So EFT, it's pretty impressive. They're bringing some of the biggest industry names right here to Atlanta for 3 days of thought leadership and executive level networking. We are pleased at Supply Chain Now Radio to be serving as a media partner. We've got Cisco, Uber Freight, Land O'Lakes, DHL Supply Chain, UPS, a lot of these folks from the C or SVP level coming out to speak and share their perspective on a wide variety of topics. You can learn more at events.eft.com, or if you want to click on the link that will be in the deck provided, that'll take you to their website, where you can find out all the information you want to learn about the 3PL and Supply Chain Summit. Of course, on anything you've heard today, if you can't find what you're looking for, you can shoot us a note to Scott, SCOTT, at supplychainnowradio.com, and we will help you out. So lastly, again, check out our website, upcoming webinars, podcasts, events, supplychainnowradio.com. Be sure to mark your calendars for the 2019 Atlanta Supply Chain Awards. We have sold out of our sponsorships and seats for this inaugural event, which is going to be held March 12th. We're going to be announcing the winners via a luncheon. But you can learn, some of the categories and some of the sponsors and supporters at AtlantaSupplyChainAwards.com. March 14th, that week, Laura, is going to be the week, we're lobbying the governor to get that name, the Georgia Supply Chain Week, much like we've got the Georgia Manufacturing Appreciation Week. So March 12th, the Atlanta Supply Chain Awards. March 14th, the Georgia Logistics Summit, which is in its 11th year. This year's summit is going to be focusing on inland port developments and strategy, which the state of Georgia is doubling down on. Inland ports is being driven extensively by e-commerce and the incredible growth there. Registration is open for the summit. Again, March 14th in Cartersville. You can learn more at galogisticssummit.com. And I mentioned the email address. If you can't find anything you're looking for in particular, shoot us a note, and we're going to help you out. So, Lauren, before we conclude today's session, any final thoughts on your end?
I really just like to point out that the skills I learned in supply chain, and I think to be a true supply chain professional and a project management professional, you're kind of hardwired. There's some DNA going on there that other people just don't have to be really good at this. And the skills that I learned working in supply chain and logistics and in those efforts made me a really good project manager. So I wouldn't be the project manager I am without what I learned. And to be, just a little secret between all of us, I've never had as much fun in any job that I've ever had as when I was working in supply chain.
Love it. And I didn't mean to add an extra consonant to your name, Laura. I don't know where Lauren came from. Laura Davidson. What a great practical presentation today. Really appreciate your time and your perspective. Again, to our audience, you'll be getting her contact information, and what a great resource. And good luck to your continued world travels as you look to support a rock and roll organization that PMI is. As we wrap up today, we want to give big thanks to our guest, Laura Davidson with PMI and PMI Atlanta. And a special thanks to our sponsors, Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. Of course, big thank you to our audience for participating. On behalf of Supply Chain Now Radio, this is Scott Luton concluding today's episode. We hope to reconnect with you again real soon. Have a great week, everybody.